All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Tanisha Beju, Program Director here at the Committee of 70, and I'm so grateful that you've joined us for tonight's conversation, Beyond the Supreme Court, How Appellate and Lower Courts Shape Justice. This is part two of our Navigating PA's 2025 Judicial Election Series. At 70, as you know, our goal it's simple. It's a high bar, but we try and keep it simple. We want every eligible voter to be informed about what's on the ballot and then to vote with confidence. So tonight, we want to help you better understand the courts that handle the majority of cases across PA. So we'll start at the local level with municipal and magisterial district courts, where many people first encounter the justice system. Then we'll move up to the Court of Common Pleas, which serve as trial courts in each county. And from there, we'll look at the state's two appellate courts, the Superior Court and the Commonwealth Court, and talk about how their decisions impact everything from family law and small business disputes to environmental regulations and election administration. Whew, it's a whole lot to do in an hour, but I know that Andrew and I can totally do it. Really, it'll be about 45 minutes because we'll save the last 15 for your questions. By the end of the hour, what we're hoping is that you'll have a clearer sense of how these courts fit together, how their rulings impact our communities, and what to consider when you're evaluating each of these judicial candidates beyond just their political affiliation. This evening, I'm joined, as always, by my amazing colleague, Andrew McGinley, our VP of External Affairs. Andrew, thank you so much. I feel like I get a crash course in, everything legal. I know that you have courses that you teach, so thank you for lending your expertise gratis.
Yeah, thank you for having me and doing this and organizing this. So much work goes into preparing sort of what we're going to cover and how we're going to structure this that Tanisha just does an incredible job with. And it's often an opportunity for me to like dust up some stuff. Like today, we're going to talk about a criminal case. I never talk about criminal cases because Lord knows that's not my area of expertise. But when we talk about the appellate courts, it's such an important process. So I'm happy to be here and have an opportunity to talk to people about our court system and, what's happening with these elections.
So, starting with the municipal court, is it okay if I didn't clear this with you ahead of time? Is it okay if I do a little triangle just to like give a lay of the land, share my slide?
Yo, of course. Yeah, of course. I know
You're
that's
like,
well.
you're like, I'm gonna say no on that. So sorry to put you on the spot there. Uh, all right. So I like to have the visual aid. It might be helpful for those who are able to watch, but we'll of course be chatting throughout. So if you're just listening to us, you're not gonna, miss a ton. But for the PA court system, many of us might not have thought about this if we went to school here in PA since, civics class or an AP Gov. But we are going to start with the local courts. That's the municipal in Philly. That's the magisterial districts in our collar counties and beyond for those who might not just be here in Southeast Stern PA. And then we'll move up to the uh, statewide courts, focusing just on Superior and Commonwealth because we did do a whole webinar last week on the Supreme Court. So just grounding us on like when do we see these judges? It's really helpful to have that framework of like maybe contesting a traffic violation, that would be moving violation or a broken headlight that's not your PPA, again, here in Philly, or something more serious like a DUI. This is also jury duty. So that's another time, like if you yourself are not in the legal profession, when do you get to see these judges in action? And then some people do have a more sustained exposure to the court system if they've had a custody hearing or if they are someone they love have been arrested and gone through a criminal proceeding. So, starting at that very base of the triangle of our court system here, that is where the municipal court in Philly and the magisterial district courts outside, that's where you would go if you were contesting that traffic ticket. Um, on the ballot, so we'll talk a little bit more about what those courts do and how they impact us. But for the ballot, here in Philly, we're going to have four candidates who would like to join the municipal court, and then five justices or five judges who would like to be retained on that court. And then outside of Philly, it really is going to vary. It's not going to be as clear cut as it is for Philly, since it's a city and a county. So you really will need to look at your ballot ahead of time to be able to see if you will have that magisterial district judge on your ballot. And then just for an extra fact, there aren't retention elections where if for the magisterial district court, so those candidates are participating in a partisan election every 6 years. So in Philly for our municipal court judges, they do the partisan election the first time they want to join the municipal court. And then after that first 6 years, they'll do a retention election where we vote just yes or no to retain them. So again, what are they doing? We have the traffic division, which, as I said, if you've contested, now that I've said this so much, people are like, my goodness, Tanisha is an unsafe driver. But this is just like a framework that I think might be helpful for people. It's also the first, they also are the judges who are interacting with people right when they've been arrested. They're the first to process and make that bail determination. And then it's also small claims court, everything that is under 12,000, which Andrew did such a great job on a webinar yesterday, just talking about the impact of this court
Yeah.
and how when we say small claims, like really that in this economy is kind of a misnomer because 12,000 is can make a very big impact on families. And so this is the jurisdiction of the judges or the candidates that we'll see here. So
Can I
in
just add one note to that piece, Anisha? When we talk about that small claims court, one of the things that I didn't touch on the other day that I was really thinking about is like so many people who end up in small claims court. One, as you said, like $12,000 is a lot of money, but they'll go in there without legal representation, right? Because
Mhm,
they
mhm,
can't
mhm.
afford an attorney. And so there are ways where they can get some legal services, but it just makes it so important to have really good judges on that level who are really thoughtful. And not that a judge is going to take one side or the other, but they have to be really prepared to handle complex issues without someone being represented by an attorney. So they have to have some of those soft skills as well. So I just think it's such an important thing to note that like that judge has a lot of responsibility.
I think that's so, I love that you said that. And talking about the qualities that the judicial candidate has is really what we're trying to encourage people to look into. And it's such a difficult thing to assess,
Yeah.
um, but it's absolutely critical for the people that they're that they're engaging with.
Yeah.
So then, thank you for that. I love that. Totally stealing that for next week's presentation.
That's what I'm
Uh,
here
so
for.
here in Philly, we have on our ballot, if you are voting in person, this is only half of your first screen. It'll be on the left-hand side, down at the bottom, often places where people kind of just glance and then, feel a little ashamed of having not done their homework. That won't be you because you joined us. So whether you're here with us live now or you're watching the recording, but these are the four candidates. You can vote for up to four. And Andrew, what should we be looking for as we go to get to know these judges now that we know that they'll be, working on one of those courts, traffic, criminal, small claims?
I think, and we'll probably go back to this a couple times during this conversation, but one of the best places to start is the Bar Association, right? And we have the Philadelphia ballot here, Philadelphia Bar Association, but each of the county bar associations as well. They conduct judicial reviews. So they're going to look at candidates for office who are running, and they're going to evaluate them. And it's a pretty complex process. And I know we have I think there's a video with Kathy Jafari, where she talks about all the work that goes into that. But just a quick thing is there's a judicial commission. Each candidate for office is reviewed, and that's done by a team of 5 investigators, which includes attorneys and lay people. And they review writings, they review written questionnaires, but they'll also directly interview people. And they're not just going to interview people who the candidate says talk to. They find people who the candidate didn't identify, who could be other attorneys they work with, former clients. They look at disciplinary records, and they conduct a really thorough investigation of that person. And then that team makes a proposal or a recommendation to the Judicial Commission, who then reviews all that material, discusses the material with the candidate itself, and then votes on a final rating. So it's a complex and important process that is such a benefit to the city or county that you're operating in. In this case, on our municipal court judges in this race, we have a little bit of a challenge where we have 4 candidates for 4 seats. There are no Republican challengers, which I always like to see more competitive elections here. And only 2 of those candidates were recommended by the Bar Association here in Philadelphia. We don't know why they weren't. But we know that Amanda Davidson and Michael Parkinson were rated recommended, and Sherry Cohen and Cortez Patton were rated not recommended. That doesn't mean you have to base your entire decision on that, right? But I do think it's a really useful resource because it is really difficult for us, I'm an attorneys and lay people, to know the work of all of these candidates. So I do think that's a great place to start. And unfortunately, even in the municipal primary for the Democrats this cycle, there were fewer recommended candidates than there were spots on the ballot. So there's a little bit of a pipeline problem there, is what I would describe it, where we need to get more highly qualified lawyers who are interested in serving on that court, because it is such an important court and the role impacts so many people in Philadelphia every day.
And we will be talking about the PA bar for the statewide courts. And with the PA bar, you do get a little bit more transparency about that decision, and you get to
Yep.
see the questionnaires that are given to the candidates. Just to make sure it's clear here, or to clarify, we don't get to see that with the Philly bar. So we'll just see the recommendation, which is either recommended, highly recommended, or not recommended.
Yep. That's a really important flag.
And then before we move to the suburbs and just mention their municipal or their magisterial court, there are judges who will be up for retention for the municipal court here in Philly. This is the second slide that you see now. It'll be the second screen if you go to vote in person. Andrew, are there recommendations from the Philly bar for retention candidates as well?
Yes, yeah, and they're on that same website. It's electqualifiedjudges.com, very easily remembered. And in that case, they have recommendations for all of the candidates except for Judge Frazier Lyde are recommended for retention. That process is slightly different. So the Bar Association doesn't conduct an entire investigation of each person. Instead, what they start with is a poll. And that poll is of the legal community in Philadelphia. It goes to every attorney, not just members of the Bar Association, every attorney practicing within the city of Philadelphia. And it asks them, have you appeared before this judge? What's your perception on all of these different criteria, their temperament, their legal knowledge, their administrative abilities, their respect for diversity, all of these important qualifications. And so they do a poll. Then the Bar Association's Judicial Commission reviews the results, and then they determine, based on that poll, who should be investigated, right? So it's just a starting point. So not everyone there gets a full investigation. But if there's, concerns about a judge, they will take the time to do a full investigation of them. And in this case, only one judge was rated not recommended for retention on Philly's municipal court.
And is this poll what was recently covered in the Inquirer article?
Yeah, so there's been a couple of articles in the Inquirer about judicial races here in Philadelphia. The results of that poll were leaked to the Philly Inquirer. That is one of the challenges with that is It's a starting point and it's anonymous. And as you know, you've probably seen an anonymous survey in your life, and sometimes people will vent. And sometimes people will say things that don't give enough detail for the investigation or for the Judicial Commission to actually do an investigation. And so there was a lot of commentary that was published in the Inquirer, which is commentary from lawyers, right? But that commentary could be without context. So I think everyone should take that with a grain of salt. It's useful information, but I wouldn't say it's like I'm going to base my voting on that article. I previously worked at the Bar Association and I saw those poll results, and sometimes people just vented. They were unhappy about a very specific instance, and you always have to be mindful of that when you're considering those results. That's why they're not public, because they're not complete information.
That was going to be my next question as to so why aren't they public? But I think that's a good answer for that.
Awesome.
Uh, so then the collar counties of it all, are there like as people are going to check out their sample ballot and at the end of this presentation, I'll make sure to drop it in the chat, like right at the point for Q&A. I'll also follow up with everyone who registered with a whole host of links, both for Philly and for collar counties. It's going to be really difficult, I imagine, for people to find out about these candidates. One, because they're not countywide. So people will find out when they're looking at their sample ballot whether or not they have a magisterial district judge, but also the bar associations, again, I'll make sure to drop all of those links in the chat later, but they don't cover the magisterial judges for recommendations. And so, how can people, if they do see this candidate, this office on their ballot, how can they follow up on these judges or, sorry, these judicial candidates, especially in light of the fact that many of them might not be? There isn't a requirement that they are licensed practicing attorneys.
And to be really clear, they didn't even have to go to law school to be on that. So they don't have to have any legal education. It's very difficult to find information about these candidates, and often like they won't have a website. So, one place to start would be social media. I mean, they are likely using, those sort of free resources because these races don't get a ton of time or attention or money. The example we have here is really interesting because again, you have one candidate and they're cross-listed, right? They've cross-filed. So they got themselves on the ballot as both a Democrat and a Republican in the primary election. In Pennsylvania, that is allowed for Court of Common Pleas and the magisterial district judges. It's not allowed for higher courts in PA.
Okay.
So what that means is they submitted the number of petitions you would need to submit as a Democrat and the number you would need to submit as a Republican. Those petitions, can only be signed by a member of that party. They can only be circulated by a member of that party. And in this case, this candidate was successful in both primaries. They may have been the only candidate. I don't have the specifics. They may have been the only candidate, but they were successful in both primaries, and that's why they're listed as a Democrat and a Republican. The idea being that these are not political benches, right? Because a lower level court, which just I think also makes it a little bit more difficult for voters to get full information.
So I heard you say, just to reiterate, like we should check for a candidate website, like if they do have one, and then social media might be another place to learn about those. And we would have on our interactive voter guide here at 70, which is ballot.70 spelled out .org. We have done that research for you for most of these judges. We have interns who are really helpful. And so if we are able to find those resources, then that would be one place that you can look. It's so difficult, like putting in and like research to many people means Google. And Google right now, if you don't put minus AI in your search, which is a nice hack. But if you were just to type in someone's name, oftentimes the first thing that comes up is the AI summary. And then the next thing are sponsored links. And so that makes it really difficult to figure out what can I trust. And so whether you're in Philly or any of the other 66 counties here across the Commonwealth, definitely recommend using ballot.70.org to help you research not just the municipal magisterial, but all of the candidates on your ballot. Anything else before we move to the Court of Common Pleas, which again, as a Philly resident, I know I have to do a lot of research on because, whoa, buddy, we have quite a few candidates.
No, let's get into it. Let's get into it.
All right, so this is a framework. This is a courtroom that we might have a little bit more familiarity with because of jury duty. In Philly, we have 101 judges that are a part of the Court of Common Pleas. There will be 11 candidates who want to join this bench. So all 11 of those are Democrats as well. Just like with municipal, there are no Republican challengers. And then there are 13 judges who are currently on the Common Pleas Court who would like to be retained. Um, Unlike the municipal or magisterial courts, every other court we're going to be talking about now, they serve for 10-year terms. So we have 11 candidates who would like to have their first term, and then we have 13 who would like to be retained for another 10 years. If people want to drop in the chat or in the Q&A, if they are here from another county, we do have all the numbers for the collar counties. But just what does the Court of Common Pleas do? First, it's everything that does not qualify for a small claim, so everything over the 12,000. And then for me, as a former teacher, the part of Common Pleas that I always focus on is family court. I say to people, the Court of Common Pleas is easier to remember because it's probably the court that hears the word please the most. This is child support. This is things doing having to do with juveniles. This is DV. And so it's a court with enormous power to impact people's lives. All judges have great power, but definitely for me, in my perspective, when I think of voting my values, definitely focusing on the family division. And then there's also orphans court that deals with guardianships, contested wills, estates. And so there's enormous power that we see here. Andrew, before we talk about who is on the ballot, is there anything else that we should know about the function of the Court of Common Pleas?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and we'll touch again on this a little bit later when we talk about some of these appellate courts, but often the decisions made at the Court of Common Pleas are final, right? So most decisions that are appealed are affirmed by the higher court. So what's happening in our Court of Common Pleas is often the final decision that will, be made on an issue that affects a lot of people. Obviously, the criminal justice piece is a huge piece for the city, especially Philadelphia, where so many folks are concerned about crime. Courts play an important role in that issue. And I always think, family division is difficult because often you're dealing with really, really tough cases. I had a reminder on my phone this morning, like a memory from, I think it was 15 years ago, of the last time I was in family court, which was when my cousin was adopted. And that's one of the few opportunities where the judge gets to have a really good day. So it's a really important court. And those decisions about families and criminal charges impact people for the rest of their lives. So those decisions are often final and they have a huge lasting impact.
And an impact on each specific county because we're now at a county level. And so it's very much county voters making sure that their court, the people on their court reflect their values. And so when we look Philly, at the Philly ballot, we can see there are 11 candidates for 11 open spots.
Isn't that convenient?
They're all Democrats. There are no Republican or independent candidates. Of course, people can always write in, but for what is on the ballot, I'm guessing again, we're going to say check with the Philly Bar
Yep.
to see who they have recommended. Anything else that we need to consider as we go through, because I know I've heard from people like I had to make sure someone knew there wasn't like the straight party ticket anymore.
Right.
And I was like, no, I was like, you can go through. We're still, even though we have a lot more independent voters here in Philly, still many Democrats. And let's say we have someone who's listening, they're a Democrat, and they're like, is that enough? Like, should I just vote for
Go
all
to
of
the
them because I am a
party.
Democrat? Like, what else should we be researching?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things I would like. One is starting with the Bar Association recommendations. Of these 11 candidates, only one was not recommended. That's Joseph Russo. There was also an article in the Inquirer, I think 2 weeks ago. Oh, no, I'm sorry. In the Philadelphia, no, there was an article in the Inquirer about this, and then we had an op-ed in the Philadelphia Citizen about this concept of magic seats. So
Mhm.
there's three candidates here. It's Russo, Santiago, and someone else who didn't run in the primary election. And so what that means is, at the time of the primary, there weren't these three additional seats were not expected to be opened. Judges who had initially filed to run for retention decided to retire. And so that opened up these three seats, allowing the Democratic City Committee to select replacement candidates. In this case, they selected two who were already recommended by the Bar Association and one who was not. And that's the only candidate on the ballot who was not recommended. So they'll all be successful in this race. There's some names people probably recognize. Larry Farnese was a state senator, I think my state senator, for years in Philadelphia. And then there's a couple of folks who have run a couple of times, including folks like Will Braveman, who I think this is his second time running for this court, who ran in a primary twice and then is finally on the general election ballot.
So then we have 13 for retention. Um, Again, we'll go to the Philly bar. Anything else that we should be thinking of, especially in light of the fact, just to name a fact, that nearly all judges are retained. There's
Yeah.
only been one judge that has not been retained. Not to say that we aren't in unprecedented times, and anything could happen, but I don't want to discourage people from doing their research on these 13, but what should they like? What would be possibly disqualifying if we know that many might be retained?
Yeah, I mean, I this is a chance where you can, you can impact the outcome, right? So we know that there's 11 people up in the general election. We know that there's 11 candidates and 11 open seats. So they're going to get through, right? When it comes to retention, I mean, you can vote against people and they cannot be retained. The Philly Bar Association has four candidates who were not recommended. That's Judge Gray, Judge DeClaudio, Judge Palumbo, and Judge Young. Interestingly, only one of those candidates even went through the process. So they have a policy that if a judge or a candidate refuses to go through the investigative process, they give them a rating of not recommended. Judge Gray, there's an article in the Philadelphia Inquirer, I think from 2 weeks ago, that details some of the reasons they may have chosen to not recommend him for retention. I would suggest reading that. And actually, if you search any of these names, there will be information available publicly about some of the issues that these judges have had in their court. There's been multiple articles recently about Judge DeClaudio, and so I take that stuff really seriously. And they don't recommend against a candidate lightly.
Mhm. So then, for our friends in the suburbs, you'll see your Court of Common Pleas candidates as the third office, no matter where you are. Uh, we've done these presentations for multiple Collier counties, and so all of them are the same. You'll see the first two offices on your ballot will be for the statewide roles, and then the very next will be for the Court of Common Pleas. Are there, so that would be for this one here, right after. Are there any candidates or any counties that you'd want to bring to light here? Also, just know that I am going to share all of the bar association links so that people can see for themselves who their county bar associations have recommended.
The only thing that really struck out to me was, most of these races are a little sleepy. But interestingly, in Delaware County, Jack Stosselheimer, who is the district attorney, is running for judge. So he had run for attorney general, I believe, a couple years ago, and now he's running for judge. I always just think that's interesting when someone's in one office and is, eager to move to another. It happens pretty often in the collar counties where a DA will sort of move into a judgeship as almost like a step down from the pressures of running an entire DA's office, which is a ton of work. So that was the only one that really stood out to me, but those bar associations are just going to be a really useful resource to you.
Absolutely. And so there will be retention. So again, with our friends in the suburbs, your ballots will be paper ballots. You'll have, for the most part, all of your competitive races on the front. And then please make sure after you fill to flip and make sure that you check out the retention on the back. As you can see with this sample ballot, there's also a continuation of local races that continue on the back before the retention. And there will be the retention questions down at the bottom. So we are now at the statewide of it all. And since there's just the two, Court Superior and Commonwealth, I'm going to stop the share here. And that way I can also make sure to just check my chat to see if anyone has anything in there. Not yet, but please feel free to drop things in either the Q&A or the chat. And then let me pull up the rest of my questions. Okay. That felt good. I was like nervous about being able to get through things like not giving anyone short shrift. All right, but now we're focusing on Superior Court, one of the two appellate courts in our state. So context is always key. That court is made up to 15 judges and handles both criminal and civil appeals that don't involve the government. That would be the Commonwealth, which we'll talk about afterwards. So the Superior Court's primary job is to review decisions coming from PA's 67 county court. So coming up from the Court of Common Pleas that we were just chatting about. And I learned today in a WHYY article that roughly 97% of its decisions are final, meaning that they're not successfully appealed to the PA Supreme Court. So Andrew had already told us that so many cases don't get appealed. People don't have the time, the resources to appeal things from the Court of Common Pleas up to the Superior Court. But then if it does reach the Superior Court, many of those are not successfully appealed to the Supreme Court. So it has like the last word on the majority of cases across the Commonwealth. Right now, there's one open seat. And that vacancy was created when Judge McCafferty was elected to the Supreme Court in 23. So, making sure that I understand the layout of this court and its function. So I have three questions and then one about the retention candidate. So my questions will be about the way the court functions and then the impact of the court and then about the candidates.
Sure.
But when a case is, this is so you as a professor. So when a case is appealed to the Superior Court, what happens? Like,
Yeah.
what are they actually doing? Because this is not something that people see. There's no jury. It's the three judge panel.
Yep.
So give us the inside scoop.
Yeah, the structure is important, right? So starting with like this isn't a trial before a jury. This is a panel of judges. But I also think it's really important to like level set that this isn't a do-over, right? When you appeal a decision from a lower court up to the superior court, you're not getting a new trial per se, right? Like you're not getting a start over. They're going to be reviewing. They kind of act as like an error fixing court. So
Mhm.
their job is to address errors on appeal, right? So they're not going to retry the case, but they're going to look at, did the lower court make a mistake about what the law is? Did they allow evidence in that shouldn't have been allowed in, or bar evidence that should have been allowed in? Did they abuse their discretion in how they manage the courtroom. So they're going to be looking at sort of a narrow record, and they're going to be looking at sort of specific questions. So it's not, did you commit this crime? It's, was there an error in the justice system,
Ah,
right? And so what that means is, you know, it's very, very rare. Well, first, they're only going to look at evidence that's already in the record, right? So they're not going to bring in new witnesses and they're not going to have all of that sort of stuff. I think sometimes, we talk about the University of Law and Order. It gets confusing how that works. And New York State is a whole different thing. But they're not going to just they're very rarely going to say, okay, the Commonwealth Court was wrong. We're going to give a new decision, right? So they may say there was an error here in how the judge applied the law or handled the facts. And therefore, we're going to vacate the ruling, which means we're going to say that decision no longer happened legally, and we're going to remand the case back to the lower court. So we're going to send the case back to the lower court, back to Commonwealth Court or municipal court. And that's where you could have a new trial. So you could be successful on appeal, and then go back to a lower trial and end up with the same result. It doesn't mean that the result was wrong. It means that there was some error in the aspect of the process. And so,
that's why it's so important to know that, like, triangle, to know that from the Court of Common Pleas, things can go up to the Superior Court
and municipal court as well.
and municipal. And then um, I heard you say that ruling can be vacated and then it's brought back to the Court of Common Pleas.
Yep, yep. So they can have an actual trial there. So it moves up and down the pyramid. It's not a one-way pyramid.
Yeah, that's really helpful to know because as we're processing and all learning so much to before we go vote, it's helpful to think of things in like a quick linear motion, but it's not necessarily. It could be a little circuitous.
Yeah.
So then, can you give us? That was so helpful to me to think of it as there's no new evidence. It's really just looking. Close to my heart. It's very much like following the rules and the procedures and
hmm
looking at that. Love that. Can you give us an example of a case? I know that you were thinking of one that we all might actually be really familiar with.
Yeah, and it's this criminal case. And I think the interesting thing about this case is it's like a really important issue, but it's a pretty small question, right? So people probably remember Danielle Cavalcante, who was convicted of murder of his ex-girlfriend. And you may not remember that fact, but you probably remember that while after his trial, he was awaiting transfer to a state prison, and he was in the county prison, in Chester County Prison, and he escaped from the prison,
Mhm.
right? So then there was this national land manhunt. There was all these sightings. My partner's family was very concerned because it was in their area. It
Rightfully
was
so.
very scary. But it got a lot of attention. He was eventually captured, right? But while he was while he had escaped from jail, his attorney filed a post-trial motion. And so the way it works is these motions, you have 10 days to file them under the rules, and that impacts your window for appeal. So you have a 30-day window for appeal, 10 days. And so these two pieces work together.
Mhm.
And his on the last day, his attorney filed this post-trial motion. That last day was the day after he had escaped from the jail. And so they appealed this decision, going to the Superior Court to say, we think that the judge in that case erred in allowing evidence in, and that shouldn't have been allowed in, that they thought impacted the decision ultimately. And what the court did was they looked at it and they noted the right, this is a quote of a previous case that they used to make their decision. The right to appeal is conditioned upon compliance with the procedures established by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and a defendant who deliberately chooses to bypass the orderly procedures afforded to one convicted of a crime for challenging his conviction is bound by the consequences of his decision. And so what they said there was, because he refused to go through the process of appeal and instead decided to flee,
Mhm.
the court will not give him this ability to file this motion, and therefore he was outside the window of appeal when they filed that appeal. So that meant he stayed in jail, right? And that there was not a new trial. And that's important, one, because this was someone who had committed a pretty heinous crime, and two, because the efficiency and the economy of justice, right? Like courts don't have a ton of resources, don't have a ton of time. So a whole new trial would take a ton of time.
Mhm. I think it's so interesting to think about the public scrutiny that goes into something like that case, um, juxtaposed and the like urgency of like needing to deal with that in a timely manner. Um, Balancing that with the fact that I heard you say it's very much like knowing the letter of the law, going through that evidence, like making sure that procedures have been followed and knowing that there's could be a backlog. It's all 67 county court of common pleas are coming to the superior court, so that definitely makes me think through these three candidates with a different lens of like how you balance something that has the national attention where you still have to have a lot of attention to detail, knowing that there's a huge backlog. I no longer want this job. At first, I thought it was
I would not want this job
cool.
either.
But the people who do,
Yeah.
there are three candidates who are running for that vacancy. There's also someone who is running a retention election. We'll get to them in a moment. But the three candidates who are running to fill the vacancy, we have Judge Brandon Newman, who is a sitting judge in Washington County, and a former state representative. That's the Democratic nominee. And then Dr. Maria Batista is an attorney and former prosecutor who previously ran for Superior Court in 23. So another familiar name for people. That's the Republican nominee. Pardon me. And then we have Daniel Wasmer, a long time attorney, I think, practicing for 35 years, college professor, and he is running as the third party candidate. So they all have a very different professional background as a prosecutor, a sitting judge, and a practicing attorney, professor, without like really focusing on any one of the individuals because we're nonpartisan and we have resources where people can definitely learn more about each of those candidates. How can we, now that we know what the court does, how should we be thinking of temperament or experience,
Yeah.
so that we go beyond just saying, oh, there's an independent, finally, like I'll vote for them, or I'm going to vote for the Republican or Democrat. Like, what should we be looking for this particular court?
When you think about appellate courts, in some ways, they really need to be like the expert's expert,
Mm,
right? So they have to be able to not just run a courtroom well, but they also need to be able to identify, legal issues that arose. And so having a lot of trial experience, either as a judge or as a prosecutor or as an attorney, defense attorney, someone who's in a courtroom a lot is really, really, that's going to be incredibly useful experience, right? I'm an attorney, technically, as I like to say. I've been, practicing law, I don't know, 13 years, but like I would be horrible at this, right? Like I think you have to recognize
not
that
saying
like
anything.
yeah, no, 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 I know. But like this is not like a job that I would be good at because I don't go to court, right? I don't practice before a judge. And I think, you really need to have that courtroom experience to understand how a trial works so that you can review complex legal issues. So you need both that experience in the courtroom and also just a depth of knowledge that requires sort of a longer career and a lot of different experience. So how do people figure that out? I
Hmm?
mean, looking at interviews from these candidates, they all participated in the event the other day. I forget the name of the event that the league did.
So we have on it's a Commonwealth and Superior Court forum. So all five of the candidates for these competitive races will be on our YouTube. You'll be able to see them there. Also, on our interactive voter guide, ballot.70.org. Both Newman and Batista both participated in our interviews that we do connecting high schools with candidates. So you'll be able to see in a shorter form, approximately 15 minutes each for those candidates. Wasserman has not participated yet. But you will be able to hear from all three on our YouTube in that video so that you can hear them and in their own words.
And then finally, again, the state bar, Judge Newman was highly recommended. Batista and Wasserman Wasmer, it's a little confusing. There's no reference to him
Mhm.
on their website, and then Batista did not participate in their process. So she was given a rating of not recommended because she didn't participate in the process.
You can see the questionnaire that Newman filled out. I think it's something like over 150 pages. So if you've got some time to go through, so just I mentioned that in kind of a comparison to the Philly bar, where we don't get to see everything that goes into the decision making process. There's a short paragraph on the PA bar's website, but then you do have access to that full questionnaire of everything that was given. And then for the last piece for Superior Court, we do have a retention candidate. So Judge Alice Beck-Dubois is listed on the ballot for retention. She served in that court since 2016, and before that was a judge on the Philly Court of Common Pleas. So we are expected with retention candidates to not base our opinion or our vote on their political affiliation. We can't see it. You could possibly learn it from their candidate website if they chose to put that forward. But really, the expectation is that we're an informed electorate and that we are judging the judges. In 2 years, I will have a new phrase so I can stop saying judging the judges, but we are basing our vote on their records. And so, how can we go about learning more about her record on the Superior Court so that we can make an informed decision of yes or no?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really difficult for any person, lawyer, layperson, anyone to evaluate a sitting judge. When you look at the fact that she's been on the court for 10 years and she has, had courtroom experience, she was a judge before she moved up to the Superior Court. That's the kind of experience that you kind of look for, right? Having that sort of long track record of being a judge. And you depend, I depend on the Bar Association. And I hate to keep going back to that, but because it's so difficult, um, judicial writing isn't written for the public, right? It's posted, you can find it online, but the way it's written isn't designed to be, for a lay person to read. And so it's really difficult to evaluate them, and that's why you have to really look at those nonpartisan sources like the state bar, who take the time to review that person's, entire performance on that court for the last 10 years before they come up with a rating. And in this case, she was rated recommended for retention.
We do have one last court to talk about. We have 10 minutes. I checked the chat and the question and answer. I didn't see anything there. I don't want to discourage people from putting things in there. Please do. Same kind of format, Andrew, for Commonwealth of making sure that we have a firm understanding of the court, its impact on our life, and then the two candidates. So Commonwealth Court, perfectly named, perfectly named. It is handling all the cases involving state and local government and regulatory agencies, and then occasionally acts as a trial court when lawsuits are filed against the Commonwealth itself. Uh, can you help us understand, like, in theory, I'm like, oh, I get it. Like, the Commonwealth is on trial. Can you help us understand, like, what falls to like the original jurisdiction, like what goes directly to the Commonwealth Court and like how it may function or impact us?
Yeah, it's unique. It's unique in Pennsylvania because it has a pretty limited scope. It's not sort of a broad court that any case can end up before it, and it's also unique in the country, right? There's not that many commonwealths, but also most states don't have this sort of structure, and so under the Constitution, they give a lot of authority to the General Assembly to define the scope there, and so it has both original jurisdiction and some appellate jurisdiction. And its original jurisdiction is basically what you described, cases that involve government or government officials acting in their official capacity, either being sued or suing.
Mhm.
And so what that means is those judges have pretty unique and specific expertise related to government structure, regulatory environment, some of these really complex regulatory laws that end up before them more regularly than a rate. I feel like I keep saying regularly, than a normal
Mhm.
superior court or court of common pleas would. They also do have appellate jurisdiction over things like uh, things that are under cases arising under certain laws, like nonprofit corporation laws, things like that. So they have both original jurisdiction and appellate jurisdiction. So, we've been involved in litigation in the past as like an amicus um, related to the election code. And so a lot of election code cases can start or end up in the Commonwealth Court because it's about, basically you're suing the Secretary of State in their official capacity about how the election code is operated across Pennsylvania and what impact that has on voters.
With those cases about like we've talked previously about redistricting and voter maps, and that's a SCOPA, like original jurisdiction piece. But then
Yeah,
for if something were to arise in a county with a mail-in ballot, and maybe that would that start in the Court of Common Pleas, or would that start with the Commonwealth Court?
it depends.
That makes
So
me feel good. That means that was a good question.
it's a good question. Yeah, because like I'm thinking about like so there have been some cases. God, I can't remember. There was a case that was filed in Commonwealth Court, and they sued. This was in the fall. They sued the county election directors of the entire Commonwealth, but they didn't sue the Secretary of State. And so they filed that case in Commonwealth Court, and it got kicked out because you weren't suing the Commonwealth, you were suing the counties. But then, something like the Baxter case, which is the one that was before the Supreme Court just a couple weeks ago, that started in the Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas, moved up to Commonwealth Court, and then to the Supreme Court. So there's a couple of different paths these things can take. It is a really good question.
Got you. So if it's county specific, like election director specific, then that's in the Court of Common Pleas because that's the county court. But if it's statewide, then that goes to
Yeah,
the.
I think one way to think about it is like who is being sued and what they're being sued for.
Mhm.
So, for instance, if you had a case suing, which we've seen cases where a county doesn't offer any sort of ballot curing procedure to go to
Mhm.
election code, that is a county level decision, right? The election
Whether
code
or
doesn't.
not to give people the ability to fix their ballot if they've made a mistake. Okay.
Yes, yes, thank you. So like that's a county decision whether or not they create that ability. It's not required under the election code, but counties have discretion to do it. So people could sue saying, well, you're making that decision as a violation of my constitutional rights. And so they could sue the county versus suing the state about the election code itself.
Mhm. Whew. All right, I felt like I actually have more examples, like more meat on the bones for the Commonwealth Court because it feels so simplistic because it feels so aptly named. But then when you're thinking what goes before them, I like that you said who's being sued and about what, and that gives it a good framework. Um, Here's another difficult question for you. Both candidates for the vacant seat, both Judge Stella Sy, who served on the Philly Court of Common Pleas since 2016, and the Republican challenger, Matt Wolford, who's an environmental and administrative law attorney from Erie. Both candidates have earned a highly recommended rating from the PA Bar Association.
Good
So,
situation to be in for voters.
yeah, it's amazing. You have two incredibly qualified professionals. So, can you let us know what does highly recommended mean? We totally get recommended, not recommended, but what can you explain that distinction? And then again, if we're going to move beyond party affiliation, like what else should we be looking for?
Yeah, I mean, highly recommended. I can cite the Philadelphia bar rules. I can't cite the state bar, but I know that they adopted most of the city bar rules for how they evaluate this. When these judicial commissions were created, they just had recommended and not recommended. There was not highly recommended because the idea was they just wanted to give people basic information. What they realized is that some judges or candidates are really really good, and they wanted to sort of to help distinguish that. So they added this highly recommended rating. And it is for exemplary, I think they use the language, exemplary candidates. And what that means for practical purposes is that Philadelphia, 80% of the Judicial Commission has to propose giving this person a rating of highly recommended. And that is a very high bar when you're going before practicing attorneys from a variety of different fields, lay people, judges. 80% is an incredibly high bar. So this means that this person is, you know, a whole head smarter than the rest of us. But for candidate, in this case where you have two highly recommended candidates, I mean, what a great thing for voters for the Commonwealth that we have two people who want to do this job who, people think could be really good at it. How do you decide who you're going to vote for?
Mhm.
That is a challenge because, as we've said, it's hard for judges or judicial candidates to um, take explicit positions on issues. So you could look at, for instance, endorsements might be helpful. You could look at candidate interviews that are published or forums to kind of get a sense of who these people are. I hate to say you can't go wrong in this case because you have two highly recommended candidates, but you have to try to figure out, does this person align with your personal values
Mhm.
or your personal politics? And you're gonna have to kind of read some tea leaves to get there because it's not like a candidate for state rep. They can't be quite as explicit about what they believe. But I know y'all are very, very smart voters, and you're sitting here with us, so you have, the tools to try to figure out who you want to vote for.
And then the last question before we give a couple recommendations in our last couple of minutes. So there's also a retention candidate here. On the Commonwealth Court, voters will see Judge Michael Wojcik up for retention. He served on that court since 2016 and has a background that includes private practice, municipal work, local government experience. Again, there are different, like I needed to go and find interviews to make sure I correctly pronounced his last name. But beyond endorsements, I heard you say endorsements, interviews, anything else for a sitting judge.
It's almost harder with sitting judges because they really can't speak. Like if a candidate for judge, you can see in an interview or an event they did a year ago before they were a candidate, um, who they were working with. And, if you do like some searching online, you're not going to find that for a sitting judge. So I think you have to look at, those bar association ratings and then try to find like interviews or discussions that they participated in. It is really hard to be an informed voter when it comes to judicial races.
Yeah, that's why we had so many people who registered, and we have this wonderful group that joined us today. Places where you can hear from judicial candidates. So definitely on our YouTube, there's both the behind the ballot for the PA Supreme Court retention candidates. There's also the candidate forum with the judges for both the Commonwealth and Superior Court. Just a note, if you are starting to watch that one, the audio is a little awkward in the beginning, so push through so that you can hear more. PCN, who is a frequent partner of ours, has individual interviews with each of these candidates. So while they may not be able to talk about the issues that are top of mind for you, you definitely can see, as Andrew referred to them, those softer skills and qualities in those interviews. So definitely check out PCN's videos and their interviews recently. And then I'll make sure to send an email since we're at time that includes all of the bar associations links. So that'll be the Philly Bar, PA Bar, Bucks, Chester, Delaware, Montgomery, as well as a video to, it's like a 10-minute video that just explains what goes into the Philly Bar's Judicial Evaluation Commission. So you can get some background there. Andrew and I did a conversation last week about Scopa. Our partner and friend Debbie Gross and I had a conversation just about the judicial retention of it all the questions that you may have there. So you'll be getting an email from me thanking you for participating or registering with this video, with all of these links. Andrew, any final words
Just one
before
thing, Tanisha, if a person in one of the Collar County goes to our ballot tool,
we...
are there judicial commission ratings listed in
Out.
the ballot tool? They are.
Yes,
So
for the
we could
count.
try to make it a one-stop shop for you as well if you visit ballot.70.org.
That's wonderful. And there are many interviews too between candidates and local high school students. So definitely check that out. That was a wonderful final plug for ballot.org.
Sounds like I'm a professional.
You have my vote always, always.
Except for Superior Court.
No, no, not at all. So I have so much homework to do. Andrew, thank you for my 1 hour law school. I hope either in the office or in the mail to get my certificate. Thank you to everyone who joined us. Appreciate you and have a wonderful night.
Yeah, have a great night and happy voting, everyone.
Bye.